OK, let's look at the coronavirus pandemic, how we've handled it in this country, Scott Morrison's call for an independent inquiry and how China has reacted. All this has generated quite a bit of attention in the US over the past 24 hours. I want to show you a clip from Tucker Carlson's influential Fox News show where he looked at how Australia and New Zealand have kept trauma from COVID-19 so low. He got an explanation from a friend of this program, Miranda Devine, who's now writing for the New York Post from New York, as well as writing for the telly.
So tell us what they did and why they did it, if you would.
Hi, Tucker. Look, we're always told, the World Health Organization kept telling us that the virus doesn't respect borders, but Australia and New Zealand are proof that it does, and of course it does. That's just ideology, not science. Closing their borders, as those two countries did, is the ultimate in social distancing. It's what countries do to social distance themselves from other countries. And as you said, in mid-March, both Australia and New Zealand closed down their borders, and as a result, they've escaped relatively unscathed from the pandemic. And the other thing they did was they followed Donald Trump's lead in early February, a couple of days after he stopped the flights from China. They did the same thing, and that was absolutely crucial, particularly for Australia. That was a few days before thousands, tens of thousands of Chinese students were due to fly back into the country after their summer break to go to school. It was a very popular decision for the people, but it was not popular at all. World Health Organization, China was very angry with Australia for closing the borders. There was a lot of pushback from transnational organizations, let's say. But the lesson in that, I think, for the rest of the world from Australia and New Zealand is that taking advice from the World Health Organization is a fatal mistake.
Most interesting segment of the night. Miranda, thank you. That's just amazing, and it just confirms a lot. Good to see you. Thank you.
Thanks, Tucker.
There you go. Strong borders, strong performance, and it's little wonder we're the envy of many nations. But the Americans have also noticed how our reasonable calls for an independent investigation into the origins of the pandemic have led to threats and condemnation from China. Here's Secretary of State Mike Pompeo.
Overnight, I saw comments from the Chinese Foreign Ministry talking about a coercive activity with respect to Australia, who had the temerity to ask for an investigation. Who in the world wouldn't want an investigation of how this happened to the world?
This comes after that carry-on I highlighted yesterday where billionaire mining magnate Twiggy Forrest kowtowed to China, called for a delay to any inquiry and ambushed Health Minister Greg Hunt by inviting the Chinese Consul General to join their media conference. Forrest tried to downplay all this morning.
Yeah, the minister did walk out looking a bit grumpy, and the media's just jumped all over that. It's been amazing to watch. He looked a bit grumpy because a journo almost tried to trip him up to stop him leaving and ask him a whole heap of questions, and he refused. Yeah. And he said, no, you can take that up with China or Andrew or me outside of this. And he walked out. He walked out like he meant to walk out, but that had nothing to do with the press conference.
It got a bit awkward.
Sam, this is the biggest beat-up ever.
The Australian newspaper reports another health announcement involving Hunt and Forrest was cancelled today. Look, the fact is that Forrest is too often an apologist for China because he's blinded by his business dealings. He, of course, is not alone in this. His fellow sandgroper, fellow billionaire and fellow great Australian Kerry Stokes was all over the front page of his own newspaper in Perth this morning asking Canberra to go easy on China. And plenty of other business leaders show similar tendencies, not to mention ex-politicians like former Foreign Minister Bob Carr. What really matters here is how the Australian government handles the issue. So far, their actions and words have been perfectly reasonable. It's been China that's overreacted. Remember, China attacked Australia for closing off flights from China. We've just shown you how important that was here. The latest outrageous threats have come because the Prime Minister and Foreign Minister proposed an inquiry, an independent international inquiry to find out exactly how, where and when the virus arose, so we can learn more and protect ourselves in the future. Foreign Minister Marise Payne won't speak to us. We've only tried for months on end. She doesn't do many interviews, doesn't seem to be particularly confident about dealing with the issues publicly. I'd love to hear from her what Australia's doing to get this investigation underway and take some heat out of this spat with China. So, as a former Chief of Staff to a Foreign Minister, let me tell you what I reckon she needs to do. Australia needs to muster a global consensus. At the moment, the US is speaking up, which is important, but Beijing just portrays this as an attempt by the White House to distract from its own woes and to have an argument with China. Our government needs to generate momentum from other nations, and the logical forum for this is the G20. After its phone hookup last month to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic, the G20 issued a statement that, among other things, called for cooperation on a vaccine. We further commit to work together, the G20 statement said, to increase research and development funding for vaccines and medicines, leverage digital technologies and strengthen scientific international cooperation. Who could disagree with that? They need to press ahead with a deal to make sure any breakthrough is shared globally on vaccines and with agreed priorities and compensation. But there was no mention of an inquiry. An inquiry should fall under the broad topic of what it calls strengthening scientific international cooperation. Australia needs to ensure there's another G20 hookup as soon as possible, and it needs to do the diplomatic legwork to ensure there's a consensus for an agreed investigation. Probably, I hate to say it, under the auspices of the World Health Organization, but of course with help from other countries outside of China and obviously with Chinese consent. That's the way through. This should not be a dispute between countries. This should be a time when the international community unites against the common enemy, and that common enemy is the virus.